There's a lot of things that can affect the budget of an animated production. But what if we're just going to talk about the visual aspects of the production? Hey guys, it's Tunika Pintua, and today I'd like to talk about visual factors that spike up the 2D animation budget. Have you ever watched a 2D animated show and said to yourself, wow, that looks super expensive, that looks high quality? That's the kind of stuff that I want to talk about for this video. Why does that type of stuff look expensive and how does it affect budget? So there are a lot of things outside of animation production that can affect the budget, such as scheduling, overall team management, or maybe lack of. Maybe you're paying other expenses like bills and licenses. Again, stuff that's not related to the visual aspect of animation. Now, the budget that I'm mostly talking about is time and energy, and that is something that any creative can relate to. If you're really skilled, you can make a studio quality level production all by yourself, but we can all agree that that type of stuff also takes a lot of time and energy, and maybe some labor. And to meet that deadline while maintaining some form of quality, you might need that money to hire other artists. Time is money. So with that being said, I want to explore how the level of animation quality can affect time. Now, the first one I want to talk about is frame rate versus the number of drawings. So in animation, there's key drawings, there's breakdowns, there's in-between. The more there are, the more expensive that animation can be. So here's a little chart I made with my mascot walking. On the left side, you have a character that's very smooth. Every single frame is a new drawing. The more we move to the right, what we see are less drawings, but a single drawing is held for multiple frames, more than just one. The more drawings there are, the more expensive or the higher budget the animation becomes. The next one I want to talk about is drawing detail versus the level of finish. Does your animation have a lot of details in the art? Does it have a ton of color? Do you have to think about values such as lighting and shading? How much labor and steps do you need to do to have a finished set of drawings for animation? The more steps there are to have that finished image, the more time and energy and labor is needed. Some of my work contained minimal color while keeping a very sketchy look, not worrying about cleanup. Some animation that I've done have flat colors, but no shading. Some had a bit more of a painterly look or more of a sketchy look, so it did require some time and experimentation to make it feel more consistent. Some had more thoughts of cell shading, choosing the right colors for a darker shade, and then choosing the right colors for a lighter shade. These are just more passes that you have to think about if you're considering these types of styles. The next one I want to talk about is the number of cuts or the number of different shots. Depending with how ambitious the project is, you can have a lot of shots with different background styles, with different layouts and different characters. That type of stuff requires a bit of planning, whereas you can have less and longer shots, or shots that reuse certain assets like backgrounds and character layouts. Something that I underestimated a lot was that because a lot of these action shots that I did were so quick and short and fast, I didn't have to be overly precious with them because they would fly by, and I could see myself getting it done quickly. But in most cases, I was wrong because I still had to develop a completely new background for each of these different shots. I had to probably design some new characters. I had to plan different layouts. I had to think about whether the shot has like moving foreground elements, background elements, or camera moves. Whereas with less shots, you can have longer takes, do less work on new characters, new backgrounds, new layouts, or just find ways to reuse certain assets. The next one I want to talk about is layer count, or how many animated things there are on screen. Does your animation have one character on screen, or does it have more than one? If you're animating two characters, for example, how are they going to interact with each other? Is that something you might have to plan out? Is there effects animation on top of it? Are there background and foreground elements that you might have to develop? Sometimes if you're animating two characters on screen, each equally animated in the same quality, it feels like you're doing the work twice for a single shot. Whereas it's a different story if it's just one character. The next one I want to talk about is the complexity of your pipeline, or the final version of your project. So some animated projects might have a very simple pipeline where you just get background, character animation, ink and paint, render. Whereas some other pipelines might require a lot of different steps. Maybe you're doing mixed media, maybe you're mixing different software. Maybe there's more steps in compositing and post-production. If you're going for a very unique look in your animated project, whether it's painterly or a very unique visual style, you might need to spend time playing around With that pipeline and finessing it, experimenting with it, exploration of it, that stuff also takes time too. And like I've said, time is money, or time is budget. Some projects took me a quick time to finish just because they were just really simple to make, whereas some, I was implementing 3D backgrounds with 2D characters interacting with that 3D background, and then having to deal with animation that plays around with effects animation, with these complex camera moves, and having more of a detailed style. And when I did these techniques, I was learning about them actively, so that also took a lot of time. So what if we wanted to decrease that budget, decrease that time? What if we don't want to go full force with our labor and energy and just work at 40 to 60% of our energy and time? What if you or your client can't afford to gain more time or budget to hire more artists? Well, what if you just want to work smarter? Here are some ideas that I have, especially when it comes to the world of hand-drawn animation. So the first one I'll say is use a style that promotes economy and priority. Not all animation has to be fully animated like classical Disney animation, and not all drawings have to be super detailed, with a lot of visual information. You can go for a more simplified style with minimal animation, with really strong drawings, or only animate certain parts of the character like their hand, their arm, instead of animating the whole character. Maybe have them snap into poses with less drawings to create that stylized look, and to have drawings hold instead of having them move all the time. Instead of animating in full 24 frames per second, maybe animate in 8 frames per second or 6 frames per second. It's going to encourage you to think more about effective yet a minimal count of drawings. The next one I want to talk about is reuse as much assets as you can. Reuse animation like loops, reuse backgrounds instead of having to come up with a new background drawing for a new shot. So maybe the new shot cuts in closer to the character's face. You could technically use the same background of a similar composition with the character and just make the background bigger and make it match perspective. You could animate an effects animation once and then just reuse them throughout the animation when it's appropriate. Like I would animate sparks, smokes, and fire, and if I needed a shot that needed that animation, then I would just reuse it. Maybe you're dealing with an animation style that utilizes graphics where you reuse assets of the animation like different head angles, different poses that's reused throughout. I think if you're dealing with a production that has a lot of dynamic shots, maybe consider using 3D backgrounds for your work. Because constantly drawing backgrounds, especially detailed ones, is going to be a lot of work, and a lot of that legwork can be figured out in 3D. The next one I want to talk about is plan each shot and prioritize important ones over the other. Now, I've talked about this multiple times in the past, but you cannot treat every shot in the production as a high priority. Some shots could have no animation at all, or very minimal movement. Some could work better as still frames. It's good to figure out which shots are your money shots and shots that you see just as filler or something that's not super important. This is why storyboarding for animation is important, because you can think about what shots could be your most expensive ones and what shots are your money shots. So, when you're storyboarding, you're also thinking about layouts for the desired shots. The high priority or money shots might require more energy, maybe some retakes. Whereas the not so important shots, you could probably do them in a couple of hours and call it quits. The next one I want to talk about is keep doing smaller projects to gain familiarity of the production as a whole. So sometimes I find it difficult to answer questions like how long something would take and how much it would cost based on the client's expectations. Because in animation, there's so many independent variables that you can't foresee until you come to it. The reason why I've been doing more loose, crude, limited animation and less ambitious pieces is so that I can try to get into the habit of turning over finished projects. This is so that I can get familiar with the scale of the project, the steps needed to get a finished product, and see what I could prioritize and what I don't need to prioritize. So the next time someone asks me how long would something take, I would probably have a better answer for that. And not only that, I would already have a pipeline figured out, so I don't need to start experimenting and spend time trying to figure that out. With doing small projects, I also encourage you to experiment with different techniques, methods, practice your skills, or try out different software. I only utilize skills and knowledge that I currently have, but you also have to allow yourself to give yourself time to experiment with different methods, software, and practices. Only now I've been utilizing more 3D into my work. I only know about 20% of the software I'm using, so I'm starting to experiment what other things the softwares can do. Recently, I learned that TV Paint has this pretty sick manga softtone effect that I can apply for a future project that has a similar visual look. Instead of doing everything frame by frame, where every new key and frame are a completely different drawing, I can sort of do this hybrid mix of a rig-based animation or a symbol-based animation. This will allow you to find more economic ways that's beyond just drawing. The last one I want to talk about is practice working under a tight schedule. This is going to force you to make decisions. That's important. You don't have the time to ponder and think. You can't have enough time to be a perfectionist because, like we've established, time is budget. You're going to have to try and finish the project, knowing that you cannot get everything perfect. You might not even be able to hit the high standard that you have for yourself. You might have to scrap the original plan and come up with a new plan that allows you to just finish the project under the deadline. You may have to resort to compromises and sacrifices. Like you'd have to start dialing certain things back or cut out certain things completely. And once you start talking with a client, you can show examples of things where you had to work under super tight restrictions and use it as a negotiation factor to give you more of a budget. To show them that, hey, because I didn't have enough budget, I didn't have enough time, something like this will happen. Now, like I've said, the monetary price of an animated project could be decided based on negotiation, location, software, talent, and other agreements. There's also things like scheduling, how a production is run, management. These are other things that can also affect the visual quality of a 2D animated project. I can't give exact numbers of how much an animated project would cost, just because everyone's rates are so different. Hourly rates, day rates, weekly rates, they're different based on the person, based on experience, and based on location. Something that I try to do with potential clients is when they reach out, they tell me what they want and they ask me how much it would cost. I would always ask them, hey, what's the quality that you're going for and what's your deadline? The deadline is going to help me establish how much time I have. From then on, you can establish your hourly rate. You can decide whether you need artists or not. You can decide if this is a project that needs to be high quality or something that's more limited. Anyways, that's all for today. Bye. Interested in learning hand-drawn animation or learning how to finish an animated shot from beginning to end? Have a look at the store where you'll find the complete Introduction to 2D Animation video course, tutorials, and other resources. Learn classical animation approaches, drawing, lectures, techniques, and other process videos. Visit the store through the link in the description below.